Hi friends, welcome to another live session on Nta Ugc Net and JRF PAPER-1. I hope I am audible to you. So in today's session, we are not going to look at any particular topic. We are not going to study any particular topic, but we are having an overall analysis of the module Teaching Aptitude. So basically, many of the NET aspirants having these two concerns in their minds. First one is what to study, and the second one is how to study. So through these kinds of sessions, we are focusing on, or we are addressing those concerns of the students so that you can understand what are the major topics that we have to study from each of the modules. So in today's session, we'll be focusing only on teaching aptitude, and we'll be having our coming sessions on the different modules that are there in Nta Ugc NET and JRF PAPER-1, so that you'll get a general idea about each module and also the important areas that you have to focus on from each of the modules. So that is our major intention. Okay, so if we consider teaching aptitude, we have a different kinds of topics that are there in this particular area. So how we can understand or how we can figure out the various areas that we have to concentrate on each of the modules. So the best thing that we can do is question paper analysis. So at least from December 2018, because India has taken over in UGC NET exams from December 2018. So we have to analyze those question papers and find out the various areas that are coming from or that are under each of these modules, or how is the tendency of questions that are being asked from each of the modules. So if you find this collection of question papers and analysis of question papers and figuring out the different areas a bit hectic, then that is what we are here doing for you. We have analyzed the question papers and we have figured out the major areas, the important topics that comes under each of the modules, so that you can understand what all things have to be studied and what all things that you can skip. So that kind of an analysis is our major concern through these kinds of sessions. So we are moving to a session directly. So now we are looking into the various areas or the important areas that we have to study under teaching aptitude. So the first area that comes under teaching aptitude is levels of teaching. So in levels of teaching, we have three different levels. These levels of teaching is also called as levels of learning in some of the questions. So this is the first area that comes under teaching aptitude. And in levels of teaching, we have three different levels. We have memory level, understanding level, and reflective level. So in the memory level, the students the learner is learning how to memorize things. That is what happens in the memory level. We are just memorizing things, memorizing facts and concepts. That is happening in memory level. Then we have the understanding level, where we are seeking the relationship between various concepts, various theories, how one concept is different from the other, how a concept differs from a theory. That kind of an analysis happens in the understanding level. And then we have the reflective level. So reflective level is the most highest level of teaching, or the most highest level of learning, where we are trying to apply what we have learned to specific situations, basically problem solving. So this is an area which comes under teaching aptitude, and we are getting questions repeatedly from this area as well. So that indicates that this is an important area that you have to focus on in the module teaching aptitude. So I'll be showing sample questions for each of these areas so that you can understand how they're asking questions from each of these areas. So here you have an example. This is a question that was asked from the area levels of teaching, and this is asked in June 2019. And the question goes like this: which of the learning outcomes are intended in teaching organized at understanding level? So we have already said that we have three different levels of teaching, and this question is particularly from the understanding level. And you have four options like longer recall and retention of facts, seeking of relationships and patterns among facts. Then you have C, creative construction and critical interpretation of ideas. And finally, you have option D, that is mastery of facts and information. So this is a pattern that you can expect from this area. these levels of teaching. You should have a thorough idea about each of the levels of teaching. So you might get questions like this, or they might ask you match the following questions as well. So you have to understand what is the basic idea, or what are we doing in each of these levels of teaching. So this is from understanding level. So when we have discussed about understanding level, we have said that in understanding level, we are trying to see the relationships and patterns among facts. So the right answer for this question is option B. So we have discussed the levels of teaching. That is the first area that we have discussed. The next area which comes under teaching aptitude, one of the important areas that comes under teaching aptitude is methods of teaching, or you can call it as strategies of teaching. And in methods of teaching, you have teacher-centered methods and also learner-centered methods. So these teacher-centered methods are direct methods in which the teacher is involved in the process of learning. Teacher is taking the authoritarian role in the process of learning. That is teacher-centered methods. And in learner-centered methods, we are giving the students various activities so that the students, by involving on those activities, they are learning. Right. So that is more like the learner himself or herself is involving in various activities, and that involvement results in the learning process. So we also have another method or another category in which we'll be using these two methods together, that are mixed methods or strategies. So we'll be using the characteristics of teacher-centered and learner-centered methods together. We'll be using the features of both these things together, and we'll be creating a process of learning or process of teaching. So that happens in mixed methods or strategies. And in teacher-centered methods, we already said that is direct method, whereas learner-centered methods are indirect method. It's not like we're lecturing. We are saying anything and everything to the students. It is an indirect method in which the students are involved in various activities, and from that activity they are learning things. It's not like we're directly giving them all the information, or we are lecturing things or anything of that sort. The learner is involved in different processes, and from that processes the learner is studying different concepts or different ideas. So this is the next area that we have to focus on under teaching aptitude, levels of teaching. Then we have to focus on the methods of teaching. So now we'll be looking at a sample question here. So basically the question from these areas are based on examples. So you'll be having various examples that comes under each of these methods. When we have said that teacher-centered method, lecturing is the best example for teacher-centered method. Then if you consider learner-centered method, we have role play. That is a learner-centered method where the learner is involving in a particular activity, that is role playing. And through that activity, the learner is studying or learning different concepts. Right. So you're having different examples for these different types or different methods of teaching, and you're getting questions from that examples. They might be giving you these examples, and you have to choose the learner-centered methods, or you have to figure out the teacher-centered method. So that kind of a question you can expect from these kinds of areas. And if you consider this question, this is asked in June 2020. So here you have two statements. This is another peculiarity of the questions that we're getting recently. So if we consider the NTA questions or the NTA's patterns of questions, you can find that the number of questions which involves statements and assertion reason are increasing. Statement-like questions, you have to find out which statement is true, which statement is false, that kind of questions. And you are also having assertion reasons questions. We had that kind of questions in the previous exams as well, but the number of questions or number of patterns, the questions in this kind or this pattern has been increased. So that means if you consider statement questions and assertion reason questions, to answer those questions, you need a clear-cut idea about the concept. So if you are getting 4 options and you have to find out the right answer from the 4 options, that is less trickier when you consider or when you compare it with statement questions and assertion reason questions. Statement questions and assertion reason questions are a bit more tricky when you consider or when you compare it with the normal questions, normal objective type questions. So that requires small concept knowledge. You have to have a thorough knowledge about the concepts, and that will help you in answering these types of questions. So this is a question that we have got in June 2020 exam, and this is from the area methods of teaching. So here you have two statements. The first statement is tutorials, group discussions, and question answer sessions are dialogic and are part of direct teaching methods. So we have already said that most of the questions from these areas are focusing on the examples that you are learning, or the different types of the different methods, the examples that you can give for different methods of teaching. That is the focus of this area. So you have different examples here: tutorials, group discussions, and question answer sessions are dialogic and are part of direct teaching methods. That is the first statement. And you have the second statement, which says that project work, laboratory work, simulation, and role playing are action based and are part of indirect teaching methods. So these are the types of questions that we are getting from the methods of teaching area. So that is very important to focus on those areas as well. You have to understand what is this teacher-centered, learner-centered, and mixed strategies that we are using in teaching. And also you have to learn the various examples that can come under each of these methods. So if you consider this question, statement 1, tutorials, group discussion, all these examples are part of direct teaching methods, right? Lecturing, we are tutoring the students. That are dialogic. Dialogic simply means dialogues. If the dialogue between the teacher and students, if that kind of a conversation happens in a particular method of teaching, you can call it as direct teaching or teacher-centered teaching. Okay. So statement 1 is correct. In statement 2, you have project work, laboratory work, simulation, and role playing. So these are different examples of indirect teaching, or you can call it as learner-centered teaching method, in which we are giving the students various activities, project works or laboratory works, where the student is doing things by themselves, right? So from that activities, they are action-based. So through that activities, the student is learning different concepts and different theories. So statement 2 is also right. So then you will be having options like this. Both statement 1 and statement 2 are correct. Both statement 1 and statement 2 are incorrect. So you'll be having options of this sort, and you have to figure out which statement is right, which statement is wrong, and you have to choose the correct answer. So in the last question, we said that both the statement 1 and both statement 1 and statement 2 are correct. So you can choose option A. So now we are moving to the next area that is coming under the module teaching aptitude, that is learner characteristic. That is an important area which comes under teaching aptitude. This is somewhat general in nature. You will be having different characteristics that are associated with the student. You'll be having personal characteristics, academic characteristics, then you have social and emotional characteristics, and also cognitive characteristics. So the questions from this area is somewhat general. You cannot learn all the things. It's not like a concept-based question or anything. If you can read the question, understand it, and if you can read the options and understand it, and if you can use some logic, then you can answer these questions. So that is the type of questions that we are getting from this area. So it is like, use your common sense, use your senses, and just read the question, understand it, try to figure out the positive answers or the characteristics that you can attribute to the learner. So that is how you can deal with, or that is how you can approach to these types of questions. So I'll give you examples so you can understand how they're asking questions from this particular area, learner characteristics. So this is a question that was asked in December 2018. And the question goes like this. From the following list of learner characteristics, identify those which will be helpful in ensuring effectiveness of teaching. Select an answer from the code. So that is the question. So basically, what is the question? You have to figure out the learner characteristics that can help, or that can improve, or that can develop, or that can help in ensuring effectiveness of teaching. So that is the question. So you have the options: extent to which learner obeys the school rules, learner's level of motivation, feelings of learners towards the social system. Then you have learners' interest in sports and games, prior experience of the learner, and interpersonal relations of learners. So if you consider the options, these are general kind of options. If you can understand the meaning of each of the options, and if you can use some logic, you can easily answer this question. So what you can concentrate, or what you have to concentrate on these types of questions are basically that you have 6 options here, and you have to find 3 right options from this. So you have to figure out 3 right options from 6. Okay, so in that case, you have to be very careful in choosing the answers. At times, you will be having an idea about the right answers, but when you're taking the options and when you're marking the answer, you might make some errors or you might make some mistakes. So after when your answer key comes, you might think that I knew this particular question, but I have clicked it wrong, or you have selected the wrong option. So that is a risk that can happen in this kind of questions. So what you can do about this question is concentrate on the options. When you are picking out the options, be careful and pick out the right option. Okay, that you can do about these types of questions, and also how you can choose the correct answer. That is also you have to concentrate on, because you will be having different options. You have 6 options for this particular question. So what is the best strategy that you can use is if you can figure out the answers that cannot be an answer for this question, or the options that cannot be an answer for this question. So if you can figure out those options, eliminate those options and try to figure out the right answer. So basically you will be having 6 options or 5 options at your hand. So go through the options, and if you have certain options that you're sure that this won't be an answer for this question, so if you can find those types of options, you can skip or you can eliminate those options and you can come to the right answer. That is a strategy that you can use for these types of questions. So here you have 6 options, and the options are extent to which learner obeys the school rules, learner's level of motivations, feelings of learners towards the social system, learners' interest in sports and games, prior experience of the learner, and interpersonal relations of learners. So if you consider these 6 options, which of the options that you can say that this is not associated with a learner characteristic? When you consider a learner, which of these options that you can eliminate from the options? So obviously option D can be eliminated, learners' interest in sports and games. So that doesn't have a direct connection to the effectiveness of teaching. So you can eliminate that option. Then you have option C, feelings of learners towards a social system. So that also is not having a direct connection to the effectiveness of teaching. So you can skip or you can eliminate option C and D. So what is the strategy that we can use? You have already eliminated option C and D. So you have to find the options which include C and D. So if you consider these options in A, B and C, you have the options that we have eliminated. So skip that options and you can come to the right answer, that is D. So this is a strategy that you can use for questions in which you have to find multiple answers. Okay. We are moving to the next important area that comes under the module teaching aptitude, that is characteristics of effective teaching. So we have discussed about levels of teaching, then we have discussed about the learner characteristics, and now we are moving to the characteristics of effective teaching. We have also discussed about the various methods of teaching, which is also an important area that comes under teaching aptitude. So here you have the next important area that comes under teaching aptitude, that is characteristics of effective teaching. As I have mentioned in learner characteristics, this is also a very general area. You'll be getting general questions from this area. Just understand the options and use logic and come to the answer. So that is the strategy that we can use for these types of questions as well. So here you have a question that was asked in June 2020. And the question goes like this. For effective teaching, which of the following is a key behavior? And you have the options: encouraging students to elaborate their own answer or that of other students, summarizing what was told by a student, teacher gives comments for the purpose of organizing what is to come, and then you have the option of making ideas clear to learners who may be at different level of understanding. So this is a very general question. If you can understand the options and you can figure out, the answer logically, that is enough for these types of questions. But what you have to do about these types of questions are practice question papers. So when you're getting familiar with the questions that are from these kinds of areas, the learner characteristics or the characteristics of effective teaching, that would help you to understand the strategy or to figure out how to approach to these types of questions. That is, you get that kind of an idea only if you're doing you're practicing the previous year question papers or the practice question papers. Okay. So this is a general question that you have got from the area, the characteristics of effective teaching, which was asked in June 2020. So the risk for these questions are, when you are getting a question like this, you might think, or all the options may sound equally important, or you might think that this can be an answer for this question, this can also be an answer for this question. You might figure that all these options are right, but to find out the most appropriate options from these four options is the task that is really risky for us for these kinds of questions. So if you consider this question, what is the most important challenge that the teacher has to face when he or she is teaching a student, so or when he is taking a class to 50 students? So the most important challenge that a teacher faces is that he has to teach the students in such a way that each and every student who are attending the class has to understand what the teacher has taught them. Because the students, if you have 50 students in class, all of them are having different understanding levels. So to make all of them understand what you are teaching is really a challenging task, right? So if you can make all the students in your class understand what you are teaching, or you can make all the students who are of different understanding levels understand what you are teaching, then you are an effective teacher. So use that kind of a logic to these kinds of questions. Go through the options and figure out certain aspects of teaching, and use logic in order to answer these types of questions. So if you consider that as the most important challenge of a teacher, then you can answer this question, option D, making ideas clear to learners who may be at different level of understanding. So these are very general questions. We cannot learn everything and go and answer these questions. These are general questions that you have to use your logic and answer. So the best thing you can do about these areas are go and practice questions. So you'll get an idea about the various aspects that are coming under these areas, how you can approach to these types of questions. That is the only thing that we can do about these areas, that is characteristics of effective teaching. So the right answer for this question is option D. Next important area that comes under teaching aptitude is domains of learning. This is very important. So we are having 3 different domains of learning, which includes the cognitive domain, then we have the affective domain, and the psychomotor domain. So the cognitive domain is related to our knowledge, our intelligence, our skills that are associated with our intellect. And then we have the affective domain, which is associated with our affections, our thoughts, or our feelings, our emotions, that is associated with the affective domain. And then we have the psychomotor domain, which is associated with our physical skills. So domains of learning is an important area from NET point of view that comes under the module teaching aptitude. And what are the questions that we can expect from this particular area? So the first and foremost thing that you have to understand about this particular area is the taxonomy that was proposed by Benjamin S. Bloom. So that is familiarly known as Bloom's taxonomy. That is an area which comes under the domains of learning. So you have to learn about the Bloom's taxonomy, and then you have taxonomies for affective domain and psychomotor domain as well. So please make sure that you have gone through these taxonomies, or the different instructional objectives that are allocated for each of these domains. So basically we have different taxonomies for these 3 different domains of learning. So this taxonomy simply means, if we consider cognitive domain, in cognitive domain, Bloom is the one who has proposed cognitive domain. So if we consider the Bloom's taxonomy, or the taxonomy of educational objectives, we consider that there are different types of learning outcomes that are expected from this cognitive domain. Okay, or there are different types of objectives, instructional objectives for the cognitive domain, and it is arranged in such a way that it starts from the least important or the least complex to the highest level of learning outcomes or the instructional objectives. So it has been made in a particular way. It is in a hierarchical order. So you have to learn the sequence of these hierarchies, or you have to learn the sequence that is involved in each of these taxonomies. You have to learn the sequence of the taxonomy for cognitive domain, you have to learn the sequence for the taxonomy of affective domain, and the same for psychomotor domain as well. And also you have to study the people who has proposed these three different instructional objectives as well. So you can expect that kind of questions from this area. So basically, if you study, if you can give a little time and effort for this particular area, the questions will be very direct. So if you can study the different levels that is associated with each of these domains, and if you can learn the different sequences that are associated with these domains, that would help you to answer these types of questions. So if we consider an example for this particular area, this is a question that was asked in December 2018. And the question goes like this. According to Bloom's traditional taxonomy, the highest level of learning in cognitive domain is. So you have the options application, evaluation, analysis, and comprehension. If you don't know what is Bloom's taxonomy and the various learning or the various levels of learning in cognitive domain, you cannot answer this question. But if you know that, you can answer this. So that is the pattern that you have to understand about these areas. So these are very direct questions. So if you know what is Bloom's taxonomy and what are the levels of learning that is associated with the cognitive domain or the Bloom's taxonomy, then you can easily answer these types of questions. So they will be direct questions. So if you learn that, you can easily answer these questions and you can score 2 marks. Okay, so these are the types of questions that you can expect from these domains of learning. So you will be getting questions like what is the highest level, or what is the least level, or you will be having questions like we have to figure out the right sequence of the various levels of learning which is associated with cognitive domain, affective domain, and psychomotor domain, so on and so forth. So that types of questions will be asked from this area. And what you have to concentrate is that if you mug up all these hierarchical orders, or if you just mug up all these taxonomies, by the end it will get more confused, because you'll be having 3 different taxonomies and you'll be having questions. In some questions you'll be having options in which all you'll be having options, and you'll be having options from all these domains as well. For example, if you have 4 options for a question from domains of learning, the first option will be from cognitive domain, and the second option will be from affective domain, and the third option will be again from affective domain, and the fourth from psychomotor domain. And you will be asking, you have to find out the levels of learning which is associated with the affective domain from the following. So if you have just mugged up these areas, or you have just mugged up these concepts, then you will be getting confused, because all these 4 options, you know these options, you have learned it somewhere, but you cannot figure out which is the right option to choose. So what you can do about these types of areas is that try to learn the concept. So go and learn the concepts, why this is placed in the hierarchy, what is the least level, why is that the least level, why this particular, if you consider this question, option B is the answer, that is evaluation. So you have to figure out why evaluation is considered as the highest level of learning which is associated with the cognitive domain. So you have to have a proper idea about the various concepts, then only you can answer these questions. If you are just mugging up things, that will make the process of figuring out the answer more riskier. So please make sure that you are learning the concepts that are coming under the area domains of learning. You will be having instructional objectives for cognitive domain, affective domain, and psychomotor domain as well. So go through those areas and try to understand the concepts really well. So we have already discussed this question. The highest level of learning in cognitive domain is evaluation. Okay. Now we are moving to the next area, that is Gaffney's 9 events of instruction and hierarchy of learning. So these are 2 different topics, the 9 events of instruction and the hierarchy of learning, but both these areas are proposed by Gaffney. So these are 2 different concepts that was proposed by Gaffney. These 2 areas are very important from net point of view, which comes under the module teaching aptitude. Okay, the 9 events of instructions are basically the activities or the actions the teacher and the student or the learner is involved in during the process of learning. So there are different events, or 9 events, 9 activities that the teacher and student is involved in the process of learning. So Gagne has arranged those 9 events of instruction into different levels. So when the learner is completing each of these levels, the learner is getting more engaged in the process of learning. So that is the basic concept or the basic idea of Gagne's 9 events of instruction. And then Gagne has also proposed the hierarchy of learning. So what is hierarchy of learning? He has identified 8 different types of learning, and he has arranged it in a hierarchical order from the least complex to the most complex. So different types of learning, and he has arranged it in a hierarchical order, which symbolize that the first level or the first level in the learning, or the first type of learning that he has included in the hierarchy of learning, is the least complex one, and the last one in the hierarchy of learning, which was proposed by Gagne, is considered to be the most complex learning type. So that is the basic idea of 9 events of instruction and hierarchy of learning. So as I have mentioned earlier when we have discussed about the domains of learning, the questions from this area is also very direct. So if you can study the concept, or if you can understand different levels that are associated with the events of instruction and also with the hierarchy of learning, you can easily answer those questions. So again, you have these domains of learning, then you have this Gagne's hierarchy and the 9 events. So you'll be having so many sequences to remember. So if you're mugging up things, that will make the process of finding the answer more riskier. So please do understand the concept and learn these areas. That is very important. Please understand concepts, why this particular level comes as the least complex, or why this particular learning type is considered to be the least complex, and why this particular learning type is considered to be the most complex one. So have an idea about these concepts and then try to answer questions. Then only you can correctly choose the options. Otherwise, at the end of the day, you have all these concepts together. You'll be having 10 modules in paper 1. You'll be having a lot of concepts there. And you have also paper 2 as well. You have a lot of things to study. So if you don't know the concepts, that will be more riskier and that will be more tougher. So please do learn the concepts. Don't go for mugging ups and memorization. So that is one thing that you have to remember. So when you are considering Gagne's 9 events of instruction and hierarchy of learning, have a clear-cut idea about both these areas. Don't confuse between these two as well, because these two areas are proposed by the same person, that is Gagne. So that is another risk. You might get confused of these two areas. So please do understand the concepts and move on. Okay. So I'll show you a sample question that is from this area that was asked in June 2019. And the question goes like this. From the list given below, identify the instructional events which form part of the structure of a lesson plan. Select your answer from the options given below the list of instructional events. So this is a direct question. So you have few options here, and from these options you have to just figure out the instructional events that are associated with Gagne's 9 events of instruction. So that is very straight question, right? So if you can understand, if you can learn this area, you can score good marks for this area as well. So make sure that you know the concept, you know the different levels, how they are arranged. So have a good understanding about these concepts. So that will help you to answer these types of questions. So without understanding the concepts, this might be more riskier for you to answer. And also, if you don't know the concept, there are higher chances that if you're planning to use your logic and find answers, that will again make the process of finding the right answer more riskier. Because if you don't know the areas and if you're trying to figure out the right answers just with your logic, you might think that all the options are correct. All the options are associated with these events of instruction. So that is a risk that you might face in these types of questions. So understand about these areas and try to understand the concepts rather than mugging up the different levels. Okay, so from these options, you have to figure out the various instructional events, and you have the options: gaining attention of students, prior knowledge of students, informing the learner of the objectives, stimulating recall of prerequisite learning, checking the availability of reading material in the library, and eliciting the desired response. So if you know what are the 9 different levels of 9 different events of instruction that was proposed by Gagne, you can easily find the right answer. We are not going into each and every topic now. We are just going through, we are having a superficial idea. We are having just an analysis of all these areas so that you can understand what are the important areas that you have to focus on. We are not going to each and every areas deeply. We're just going through the different areas from which we are getting questions repeatedly. So that is our intention of this particular session. So you have to remember that. So you have to find out the various instructional events from these options, and you will be having cards like this, and you have to find the right answer from the option. So the right answer for this question is option B. If you don't know Gagne's 9 events of instruction, this might sounds difficult for you, but if you know, you can easily understand and you can easily figure out the answer for these questions. So what is the next area that you have to focus from teaching aptitude? So in teaching aptitude, we are having a few theories which are associated with psychology as well. So here you have a list of the various theories that you have to learn in teaching aptitude. The first one is Piaget's model of cognitive development. Then you have Pavlov's classical conditioning. Then you have B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning. Then you have Dale's scorn of experience. Then you have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Then you have Vygotsky's social development theory. So these are a few theories that you have to learn from NET's point of view. But you don't have to go deeper into these theory parts. You don't have to go deeper and you have to read a lot of essays and all that. You just have an idea about all these theories. What is the thing that is focused in each of these theories? That will be enough. So the questions again from these areas will be very direct. If you have a basic idea about these theories, you can easily score marks for these questions. You will not be getting questions from each of these theories as well. You might get one question from any of these theories. That might be the pattern that you can expect. So please do remember that these are some of the theories that comes under the module teaching aptitude. These are psychological theories. So have an idea about these, a basic idea about these theories, and the questions will be very direct. So if you know the theory, you can easily score marks for this question. So have a basic understanding about these different types of theories. You have Piaget's model of cognitive development, Pavlov's classical conditioning, then we have B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning, Dale's scorn of experience, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Vygotsky's social development theory. So I would like to give you a sample question. If you don't know the theory, it is really hard for you to answer this question. But I am just showing you a sample question so that you can understand how we can expect a question from this area. So this is a question that was asked in December 2018, and this question is from the area Vygotsky's social development theory. So this is a theory-based question, and the question goes like this: which of the following indicates the concept of zone of proximal development as suggested by psychologist Lev Vygotsky? So you have the psychologist's name there, and also you have the theory there. So the very direct question, you have to find out the correct option. That's all. And the options are: a learner's brain develops faster in childhood, a learner learns effectively when it is supported with real life examples, what a learner can do with help and without help, friends interaction is very important for proper development of child. So what is the question? You have to find out the correct option that is associated with the concept of zone of proximal development. So what is the peculiarity of this question? This is very direct. This is a very direct question. If you know what is this zone of proximal development, that is enough. You can answer this question. But if you don't know what is this zone of proximal development, which was proposed by Lev Vygotsky, it is difficult for you to answer. So if you learn this area, you can score 2 marks. And if you don't know this area, there are high chances that you choose the wrong option. So the answer for this question is option C, what a learner can do with help and without help. You might, if you know what is zone of proximal development, you already had figured out the correct option. But if you don't know, this will be a tougher area for you. So please do check with, or please do please try to understand these theories, have a basic idea about these different psychological theories, because the questions will be very direct. A basic idea of the theories will give you 2 marks. So please take an effort to understand or have a basic idea about these different types of theories, and you can expect direct questions like this from these areas as well. Okay. So what is the next important area? That is types of evaluation. This is an area from which we are getting questions repeatedly. In every exam, you will be having a question from this area. So types of evaluation is very important from next point of view, and you have to give a special emphasis to this area as well. Levels of teaching, types of evaluation, these are some of the areas from which we are getting a lot of questions. So in types of evaluation, you have different types of evaluations, in which we have placement evaluation, formative evaluation, summative evaluation, diagnostic evaluation, norm referenced evaluation, criterion referenced evaluation. So what you can do about this area is understand each of these types of evaluation. When did this type of evaluation happens? So if you consider placement evaluation for an example, placement evaluation is a process of evaluation that happens even before a particular course is starting. Or if you figure out, or if you consider formative evaluation, that is a process of evaluation that happens during the course. So when is this particular evaluation happens? What are the various aspects that are associated with this evaluation? What are the different characteristics that you can figure out from these evaluation? Or what is that particular domain? We have already discussed about the various domains of learning, right? So each of these evaluations are associated with different domains of learning. So that you have to remember. And also you have to remember the final result of each of these evaluations. For example, if you consider placement evaluation, that will result in an entry or a rejection, right? If you are writing an entrance, it is for a placement evaluation. You are trying to get an admission for a particular course. So that happens even before the course begins. So what is the result? You might get a seat there, you might get a seat for the course, or you will be rejected. So that kind of an idea. All right. So go through all these types of evaluation, try to figure out the time in which it happens, and what is the major domain which is focused by each of these evaluation, and what is the final result that you can expect from these evaluations. So these are the different types of, or different areas that you have to focus on this types of evaluation. So you might be getting questions from, like you will be getting a question from formative evaluation itself, or you will be getting a question from placement evaluation itself, or even you will get a question like a match the following question, where you have all these evaluations together and you have to find the right matches for it, or you will be having different examples for each of these evaluations, and you have to find out which example is correctly matched to placement evaluation. And then questions like that sort of questions can be expected from this particular area. So another area which is associated with the types of evaluation are the evaluation systems as well, like the choice-based credit system. So that types of questions can be also considered under this area evaluation. So types of evaluation is a very important area. So please do study these areas, different types of evaluation, what are their peculiarities, their characteristics, when did these types of evaluation happens, and also what is the domain which is concentrated on these evaluation, what is the final results, so on and so forth. So I'll be showing you a sample question which was asked in June 2019. So when I have said you about the tendency of questions that are coming from this area, I said you will be having questions directly from one of the evaluation types, or you'll be getting a question from diagnostic evaluation, or you'll be getting a question from formative evaluation itself. That is the type of question that you can expect. And also you'll be having match the following questions as well. Like you'll be having all the different types of evaluation at one side, and you'll be having their characteristics on the other side, and you have to match it together. So that kind of a question can be also expected from this area. So this is a question that is from diagnostic evaluation. The areas is types of evaluation, and diagnostic evaluation is a type of evaluation, right? So this is a very direct question. Diagnostic evaluation ascertains, and you have the options: students' performance at the beginning of instructions, causes and remedies of persistent learning problems during instructions, degree of achievement of instructional objectives at the end. Then you have learning progress and failure after instructions. So when you consider diagnostic evaluation, what is the major focus of diagnostic evaluation is the major causes and remedies for the learning problems. In formative evaluation, we'll be trying to figure out the various learning problems that the learners are facing, and in diagnostic evaluation, we'll be trying to figure out the causes and remedies for these learning problems. So that is the focus on diagnostic evaluation. So if you know the different types of evaluation, the different characteristics of these evaluation, or when is it happens, and what is the final results, that's enough. You can score 2 marks for these questions as well. So in diagnostic evaluation, we are actually trying to figure out the causes and remedies of persistent learning problems during instruction. So the right option for this question is option B. The next area that you have to focus on is the types of questions. We have a lot of types of questions, and you can expect questions from this area as well. So here you have a list of the various types of questions, which includes convergent questions, and you have divergent questions, fact-based questions, then you have context-based questions, and finally you have open-ended questions and closed-ended questions. So please do have an idea about these types of questions, what a convergent question is or what is a divergent question is. So have a basic idea about these types of questions as well. You can expect a question from this area as well. If you analyze the previous year question papers, we have questions from this area as well. This is an important area from which you are getting questions. Okay, so you have to concentrate on this area as well, types of question. So here you have an example or a sample question from this particular area, which was asked in December 2019. From the list given below, identify those questions which are called process rather than content-based questions. So here you're getting another idea as well. You have to study about the various types of questions, and you have to focus on which are the types of questions that are process-based and also which are the types of questions that are based on content-based questions and process-based questions. So you have to first go through the different types of questions. If you have an idea about those questions, then you can categorize them into different categories, the process-based questions and the content-based questions. If you know the different types of questions, these questions will be very easier for you. So from the options, if you consider the options, these are all the different types of questions. So you have to figure out the process-based questions from the options. That is the question. And you have the options, convergent questions, divergent questions, fact-based questions, concept-based questions, then you have open questions and closed questions. And you'll be having different cards like this. So you have to choose the correct answer from the options given below. So this is the type of question that you can expect from these areas as well. Okay. The next area is types of tests. So we are having different types of tests, the aptitude test, then you have the personality test, then you have the projective personality test. There are various types of tests. This is another area which is focused by Nta Ugc net. So we'll be getting questions from these areas as well. So here you have a sample question given here, which was asked in June 2019. And what is the question? Which of the following is an example of a maximum performance test? So from the options, you have to figure out the example of a maximum performance test. So you have to learn each of these tests as well. This is an important area from NET's point of view. So you'll be having questions. You can expect questions, direct questions from these areas as well. So this is a question that is based on the aptitude test. So aptitude test is considered to be an example of a maximum performance test. So in an aptitude test, we can figure out the overall performance of a student. So it can be considered as an example of a maximum performance test. So you can expect questions from these areas as well, types of test. Okay, so this is a question that was asked in June 2019. So another area that you have to focus on, but this is a bit more simpler for you because we'll just check the question. This is from June 2020. Given below are two statements. One is labeled as assertion and the other is labeled as reason. So when I have discussed about the question patterns, I have said to you that in NTA UGC net you are getting more statement and assertion reason questions. Before that also we were getting questions from this area, we were getting these patterns, but the number of statement questions and the number of assertion reason questions are increased. If you consider both paper 1 and paper 2, this is applicable for both the papers. So what is the major focus? You have to study the concepts. If you mug up and if you memorize things, that would be difficult for you to answer the questions or to pick out or choose the right answers. But if you know the concepts, that would be enough. So that is the focus of Nta UGC net. That's why they have increased number of statement questions and assertion reason question. So here you have an assertion reason question, and in assertion you have the use of ICT has a great potential for optimizing learning outcomes, and you have reason as ICT promotes scope for variety, flexibility and attractiveness. So basically from the question itself you can identify the area. This is basically the involvement or the use of ICT in education. You have another module which is information and communication technology, which is a separate area. In that we have a detailed discussion on the use of ICT in higher education. So that is there, that is a detailed area in that particular module, but you're also getting questions like this in teaching aptitude as well. So the online modes of study, how we are using ICT for studies or ICT based teaching methods. So these are some of the areas that you have to focus on teaching aptitude as well. So in most of the cases, the ICT based questions or the ICT based teaching methods, these are like assertion, reason or statement like questions. So if you can read and understand the statement, or if you can read and understand the assertion reason, this area is not that difficult because you have a detailed analysis of this area, or you have to you have an area like the use of ICT in higher education, in information and communication technology as well. In that you have to go a little more deeper into this area. But in teaching aptitude, when you consider the application of ICT in teaching or in a classroom, that is a bit more simpler compared to the ICT part of it. Okay. So if you consider the assertion and reason from this area, you have the assertion, the use of ICT has a great potential for optimizing learning outcomes. That's very true, right? If you're using ICT, if you're using information and communication technology, that will increase, that will optimize the learning outcomes. And you have the reason here, that is ICT promotes scope for variety, flexibility and attractiveness. Why ICT is optimizing the learning outcomes? Because ICT is promoting more scope for variety, flexibility and attractiveness. So these aspects of the use of ICT in education or the use of ICT in teaching methods will increase, or which will optimize the learning outcomes. So this is a very simpler question. If you can understand, read and understand the assertion reason, that would be easier. But please do remember, you have deeper areas that is associated with ICT in higher education, in information and communication technology. Please do remember that as well. So how you can expect the options from this question? You will be having different options like both A and R are true, and R is the correct explanation of A. Then you have both A and R are true, but R is not the correct explanation of A. A is true, but R is false. A is false, but R is true. So these types of questions that, as I have mentioned earlier, these are a bit more riskier than if you need to find a right option from the four, right? So you need to know the concepts. Otherwise, it is sometimes you might know the first statement, you might not know the second option, but sometimes you might know the assertion, but you're not confident enough, or you don't know whether this particular reason is associated with the assertion. So these kinds of confusions can happen in the statement kind questions and also in assertion reason questions. So please do try to understand the concepts and learn, and also practice questions as well. So whatever you have learned, if you're not practicing the questions, you cannot get that kind of a strategy that you can follow in the exam. Or practicing questions will help you to understand the various approaches that you can use in order to deal with each of the questions. So when we have discussed about the question earlier, we said that it's true, right? ICT promotes the optimizing of learning outcomes. And also why it is so? Because ICT is promoting variety, flexibility, and attractiveness. So these aspects of using ICT in education will increase the learning outcomes. So what is the right answer? Both A and R are true, and R is the correct explanation of A. All right. So in this session, we have discussed about the various areas that comes under teaching aptitude. As I have mentioned earlier, the two major concerns of most of the NT aspirants are what to study and how to study. So in these sessions, we are trying to address those aspects. So we'll be having analysis of each of the modules in the coming days. So in teaching aptitude, we have figured out the areas from which we are getting questions repeatedly. We have levels of teaching, then we have the different types of evaluation, types of tests, then we have the various theories that are associated with teaching, then you have the domains of learning. You have a lot to study, right? So there are various areas in each of these modules that you have to focus on that will help you in understanding the concepts well, and that will boost your confidence in approaching Nta Ugc, NET, and JRF paper 1. So if you ask the second question, how to study? The first thing you have to analyze is you have to figure out the areas that you have to learn. That is the first step that you can do. That is what we are trying to figure out here. We are trying to help you out with that aspect, the analysis of question papers, and we are providing you with the areas that you have to focus on. Then the second thing you have to do is make a personal strategy for yourself. You are the one who knows your weaker points and also your strongholds. So make sure that you have a personal strategy for yourself. You know what all areas are easier for you, what all areas are in which you are struggling. So, and after understanding those aspects, try to make a personal strategy for yourself. The third thing you have to remember is consistency. You have to study continuously. If you're studying for 4 days and then you're taking a break of 8 days, then you have to restart the entire thing from the beginning. So make sure that you're allotting time for both paper 1 and paper 2 continuously. So please do study continuously. Consistency is very important in any kind of competitive exams. And the next thing that you have to remember is revision. We know that at the end of the day, you'll be having both the papers, paper 1 and paper 2. You'll be having a lot of concepts, lot of theories, lot of things to study. And if you're not revising things, when you're getting the question papers and when you're seeing the questions, you might know the questions, but you cannot answer it rightly. So please do remember that revision is a must. So even if you are completing a particular topic, go again and revise those areas, because you will be having a lot of things to study, right? You have 2 papers. So make sure that you're revising these areas continuously. That is the next thing that you have to focus on. And practicing papers, practicing question papers and mock tests is compulsory. You have to do and practice question papers, because even though you know all the concepts, the way in which you have to approach a question is completely different. You might know all the concepts, but at times the way, the strategies that you can use, the way you have to approach a question, that requires a separate training, right? So that you can when you are reaching there, when you are attending your exam, that will lessen your tension. That is the major factor of it. So please do practice previous year question papers and do mock tests as much as possible. That is very important. So these are some of the tips here you can focus on under the concern how to study. First and foremost, analyze the different question papers and try to figure out the major areas that you have to focus on each module. That is what we are doing here now, so you can get an idea about the major areas, the important areas that comes under each module. Then you have to figure out a personal strategy for yourself. Try to figure out your weak points and your strongholds, and try to make a proper strategy for yourself. Consistency is most important. Study continuously, and don't forget to revise what you have learned. And also, doing question papers and mock tests is a compulsory thing. So you can have 2 options for this. You can either go for self-study, or you can have a guidance from someone. So if you're going for self-study, please do remember you have to collect the various areas, try to make notes on it and study on those areas. And if you are in need of a guidance, or if you need any support, or if you need a personal mentor for your preparation, we are here to help you. So our admissions for both online and classrooms are available now. So if you need any kind of further information, you can contact us through the phone number that is shown in the screen. All right. So in this session, we have discussed about the various important areas that comes under the teaching aptitude, and I have shown you a few sample questions as well. So in the coming weeks, we'll be discussing about the major areas that comes under the other modules as well. So I hope this session will help you in your preparation for Nta Ugc NET and JRF Paper 1. Thank you.